All right, good afternoon. I am Liz Stoddard, Chair, City of Albany IDA Governance Committee. Called for these meetings ordered, July 18th. Note that we have all members in attendance except for Anthony Batty. First item on the agenda would be to ask for a motion to waive the reading of the minutes and accept as presented.
So moved.
A second,
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Eventually, I'll figure out what I'm doing again, even though we've just done this twice. Unfinished business, you will go to project assistance and evaluation framework.
Yeah, so we're excited to convene a governance committee on the project evaluation assistance framework today. And some of you are newer board members, you may not have been involved in the development of the first project framework. But just to give you a little bit of background, you have it in your packet, you're all very familiar with it, and being a mechanism for projects in recent years. When convening and starting that process of framework development back around 2016, we had done multiple market studies, more than a year of data analysis and calibration coupled with significant board input and guidance. And all of that was set to meet a number of items, really to set expectations on the applicant side and the developer side, and also to provide consistency in the levels of assistance provided, because as you know, we have the pilot schedules in the framework document that we follow. And really that allows us to provide clarity on the baseline eligibility criteria that is necessary for becoming eligible for our assistance, for our the IDA provides, as well as providing information on the community commitments that we would prioritize for projects, and for projects to be eligible, what they need to meet there to meet, to obtain approval for a deviation from CADA's uniform tax exemption policy. This framework also set up some restrictions on eligibility for what types of projects may not qualify, for various reasons. So we'll get into a little bit more detail on that later on, and we'll talk a little bit, Andy will talk a little bit about the 2020 refresh that we started. But ultimately, we have found that the framework worked really well for CADA in terms of, like we said, setting that consistent level of review and expectations on both ends, really, sets the bar high for our operations and what we're trying to accomplish here. So I'll pass it over to Andy now to talk about the 2023 refresh.
Great, and I'll note that we do have Sarah Woodworth here with us today from WZHA. She was on board with the agency with the initial creation of the framework and was contracted again last year to assist us with this refresh. So she will be presenting some of her findings. What we did include as part of the materials for this was a memo that Sarah Woodworth put together at the end of 2023, really laying out where things stood from a progress perspective. I think, and she'll speak to this momentarily, she's then going to provide some numerical details and a little bit more meat to that update as well via a slide deck that she's put together. But prior to that, I really just wanted to quickly go through the refresh to date very quickly. So once we determined that, as Ashley noted, with market conditions and just knowing that, every 5 years we had planned to relook at this evaluation tool. When we decided to do that back in 2022, as part of that, the initial step was to contract and complete multiple market studies, namely market studies for commercial here in Albany and also for housing here in Albany. So we did that. And that has served as a great groundwork for the initial analysis that has taken place. However, in 2023, we did have to put the process on pause. There were a number of things that popped up unexpectedly that would that have and we anticipate will really dictate what levels of assistance this framework provides for and what levels it needs to provide for, namely the passing of the inclusionary zoning provision by the city of Albany, And also the citywide reassessment coupled with what we expect would be an adjusted tax rate. Which we are still waiting for that to really be finalized and come out so that we can make sure that the abatement structures that are in place are sufficient and not conversely overly sufficient in terms of supporting and ongoing real estate development here in the city. But with that, what I would like to do is turn it over to Sarah. I did distribute her slide deck to you, and she will be here with us. I would like to request to go into an exempt session to seek the advice of counsel, mainly surrounding tech.
May I get a motion to go into exempt session to discuss or advise the council on the UTEP?
So moved.
May I get a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, am I up?
Except last breakout room, that would be good.
And quorum counts at the beginning of the meeting, now.
Recording.
Yeah, to receive building.
You guys could both leave it. I'd be my own quorum right now.
Well, we're live.
Okay, well, we're out of exempt session, no action was taken. Now I'm gonna turn it over to Andy.
Yes, so real quick, a lot of this is a regurgitation of some of the update that was given on behalf of the consultant, but we still have areas of analytic focus that we are going to crunch and get back to you. We'll, as noted at the beginning of the meeting, we're gonna be seeking guidance, and we're also gonna be offering recommendations simultaneously, so there'll be future discussions once we finalize our financial modeling, which we expect to do in the next couple of months. With that, I'm gonna turn it over to Ashley, who is going to run through some of the key policy areas and also some of the, we're gonna put some slides up that give an example of some of the data we've been crunching on how the framework has performed and the types of projects that it is enabled to move forward and how they've scored.
There's that look of the clicker. I know, it's usually easier to do next slide, please, because then it actually works. So yes, as Andy said, we wanted to go through some of the policy areas and how the matrix had performed with the original version. You know, as Andy had mentioned earlier in the conversation, this came online in 2017 and assisted staff in analyzing more than. Is this book turned on? I don't think so. Can we use the mouse? Can you go to the spot, the chart with the framework overview?
Okay.
So you see the 20 projects evaluated, more than 370 million in total investment. If we go to the next slide or next on your packet, you'll have how those projects scored out in terms of the points they earned in the framework. You'll see the 10-point threshold. That's a requirement of the framework on the line. You'll also see noted that in the summer of 2023, we paused the framework due to the market conditions as discussed previously. But you'll see how the majority of projects meet that 10 points, some exceed it. And then due to the market conditions, there's been a number of projects that we've evaluated outside of the framework moving forward. And you see on the next slide, this is just a different way to look at the breakout of the 20 projects that we have approved, just showing the percentage of projects that met the 10-point threshold, exceeded the 10-point threshold, or below the threshold in terms of the framework. Numbers we love to see. And then just taking a look at some of the key areas under consideration as part of the framework. Target geography, as you know, is one of those areas. This shows how projects, how projects fared in terms of distressed census tracts, high vacancy census tracts downtown, business improvement districts, and then as far as being in areas with a neighborhood plan.
And actually, if I may, sorry, Darius, real quick, what you're gonna start to see with some of these slides, and there's only a handful left, is there's multiple categories that encourage development in downtown. So as the framework stands now, it's heavily weighted towards encouraging development downtown. So that may be something that we want to think about going forward. Is that a wider net? Are we happy with how that's panned out? And just food for thought.
There's overlap in these categories too for some projects.
Exactly. Right.
So the next criteria we took a look at and analyzed was identified priority. You see downtown residential, as Andy just mentioned, tax exempt vacant properties, identified catalyst sites, historic preservation or community catalyst. Obviously, the highest one there is those tax exempt or vacant properties, but really hitting a number of them across the board. Good variety. Identified growth area. So this one is an interesting one, right? Existing cluster. We hit about 15 projects there under existing clusters, conversion to residential. You see 5 of those. the one manufacturing or distribution project, and then, no projects under technology or hospitality. I will note, there, and Andy can probably back me up on a little bit more detail on that, but hospitality projects, the main reason why we don't see projects coming through for approvals there under the framework is because they're typically larger scale projects that are greater than the $25 million threshold for the framework. So they would come outside of the framework. So something like the Hyatt project would be greater than the maximum size on this. Technology, I think the obvious things there's a lot of federal support there, state support. They can be on tax exempt properties already potentially. So for a number of reasons, those, aren't coming through on the CADA side. Doesn't mean that we don't want to still incentivize, prioritize, and try to get projects in those identified growth areas, but food for thought, things to consider moving forward. Estimated construction jobs versus actual. Seeing those orange bars higher than those blue bars is obviously what we'd like to see. And so, performing well in terms of actual jobs surpassing estimated jobs. And trying to keep an eye on that as well. And then you'll next see assessment value per residential unit. And these are the 20 projects. This also does note the projects that were considered outside of the framework due to the market conditions making that framework challenging for projects. And there's also a trend line that shows the trend line for assessed values. So this is still all just information to inform conversations moving forward. Staff wanted to be able to have all of these numbers to really take a look at the categories throughout the framework so that this could inform future discussions on, do we revise the categories if community commitments remain relevant, things like that? Do they change and are they different things, or are they the same general criteria but revised to be different standards? And so I think in the next steps, as Sarah noted, she'll be looking and trying to work work through her model with the new data that's provided by the reassessment. But staff will be taking a look at more the key policy areas and looking at these types of things and how those play into the modeling and the financial analysis that Sarah is doing.
And I think a lot of these, staff thinks a lot of these, really the scoring points in the framework are what takes almost surgical calibration. A lot of times if you get rid of one or you tweak the weight of one, it can really move things in different directions. So we'll be seeking quite a bit of guidance from the board and committee going forward as to any of these point scores, whether they're kept, whether they're tweaked, whether they're removed, whether they're replaced with something else, whether it's calibrated to potentially allow and encourage for smaller scale projects, which previously this framework did not really do. The general restrictions pretty much mandated that smaller projects kind of seek other forms of assistance, which at the time via the 485A program and the historic tax credits and the like was a valid route forward. We think it may be a little more difficult and that may be a harder thing to accomplish. So we'll come back with additional recommendations and seeking guidance on that.
Make sure that the cost versus the benefits would tip more in favor of those smaller projects that can happen in this market.
Would like to give a shout out to Olivia, who put all these slides together. She's been here a few weeks and we promptly threw her right into the thank you to her for keeping us close.
Made her provide every chart known to man, and she did it with a smile on her face when they came out. Thank you.
It's probably early, but something I noticed on Sarah's presentation, as we're going through, there was no requirement for affordable housing on units less than 20. If I remember that slide, it's probably early, and I know they won't come to us, but Is anybody out there seeing a trend towards people moving in that direction already, or do you think it's too early?
Yes, we're seeing, if you look at the projects that have come through since that measure was put forward and passed, and since the framework has been paused, because most of them have been 30 units or smaller, that's the market,
Okay.
market rate and commercial. We do have a smaller project in our pipeline, which we may be introducing in the near future, that is on a smaller scale market rate, that would not be subject to that provision.
There's just a couple of those, aren't there?
Correct.
And they were initiated a couple year or two ago.
Correct.
Okay, yeah. And since then, nothing else is coming in the pipeline. Nothing else that is market rate. That. There's not even any proposals from what I understand.
We did introduce one project a number of months back, but it's my understanding that's now on pause, so we don't think there's anything in the pipeline that stands a good chance of moving forward imminently.
Mhm. Except for affordable housing, except not affordable housing, for low income housing.
Correct, we are analyzing those as we saw at the board meeting today.
Thank you.
So, staff, and Sarah, the consultant, have a heavy agenda ahead of us, in the coming months. So dependent upon when we receive data like the millage rate, and get the numbers pulled for assessed values and things like that, will sort of inform, next steps, that we wanted to refresh everybody's brains on, what we had done to date, what Sarah had done to date, and get people thinking about, what types of criteria, should community commitments, continue to be at play, what kind of criteria, and what kind of changes we might wanna move forward with.
Thank you very much for that update. I need to kick it off again.
Yes.
Any further questions or comments on the updates portion of today's agenda?
Just looking at the last slide on the community commitments, it's interesting. The low utilization of MWBE in the city.
Correct. Yeah, and some of these, what we're seeing here is points that we know applicants qualified for and took. A decent amount of these projects are still under construction or in the period in which they're still reporting back to us. So for some of these, we know that how the application looked at eligibility and how they scored, but we don't know yet whether they attained levels that the framework provides for. We will, but we don't know yet, and hopefully we'll have a wider data pool as we move forward to really be able to inform us on whether those levels are correct. Are they what's prohibiting some of these from being utilized, or conversely, do those levels need to be increased? Are they being met with too much ease? So we'll dive into that as well and bring some data back to the group for everyone to observe.
And they could be utilizing MWB, but it's not reporting it, or they're not under any obligation to report it to us.
Yeah,
Correct.
I was just thinking that if they met their 10-point criteria, and they may have picked something else to meet the 10 points, so they might be actually accomplishing that, but didn't want to be beholden to that requirement in addition to everything else.
Other items on the other business, video training.
We will be coming back to the governance committee with future training dates for ABO training is recommended best practices on an annual basis. So we will be disseminating those in the upcoming months as we schedule more governance committee meetings. So stay tuned.
Did we do the?
Oh, sorry, skip that. Review the adequacy of the governance committee charter.
So you've been previously distributed the governance committee charter in your packet, and you have been able to review, and you have it in front of you as well. Does anybody, provided there's no recommended change, it's a review and noting the review.
I find this adequate.
Okay. Then a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
May I get a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.